Okay, I'm going to get started so that we can stay on time and appreciate your attention. I'm Colin Hobson, CEO Open Spatial. I've been with the company, 18 years, something like that. Anyways, and I've met some of you folks who were registered. I recognize some names. So anyway, good to be back. On that, let me introduce Philip Nell. Actually, Philip, you introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so Philip Nell, I'm running the consulting team here in Australia, and I've been with the company for quite a while as well. Worked with one of our customers before joining Open Spatial, and that's been 14 years ago, 15 years ago almost now. Thanks, Connor.
Good. Thank you, Philip. Okay, so I'll just jump right in. So the purpose of today's webinar is really not to lay out everything. It's more somewhat of a discussion and looking at the sorts of things we've been looking at as a company as well, and what our customers have been asking for. So really it's focused on the pros and cons of adding cloud capabilities to your GIS solution. So I'm not trying to explain all of cloud. It's really what's the benefit for GIS and how do we deal with that and what have we seen happen and what are the challenges. By way of an agenda, there is a little bit of why cloud and why use cloud for GIS, and then what is it and what do we mean, just to set a frame of reference. How do you actually do it? And we'll spend some time looking at pros and cons and intermediate stuff like hybrid solutions. We do have a couple of polls in between. I'd encourage you to participate if you can. That'd be appreciated. Obviously, everything's anonymous. We don't see any names. We just see, sort of how many people think this versus that kind of thing. So without further ado, I'll jump right in. So we are in interesting times in GIS, particularly as GIS it's a discipline that covers and integrates information from all sorts of different sources, serving different people, and also, relies on technology to achieve that. So cloud is a, front and central discussion on what's going on and is playing an increasingly, critical role in that transformation of moving towards a full digital kind of world. It really is one thing. I mean, if we look along with AI, analytics, IoT, or even data collectors, and just the level of connectivity and speed within which we can move data around, things are radically changing. But just looking then at that cloud piece of that, it touches on virtually all those other things. But it is it's kind of an interesting thing as GIS folks. Well, how can we benefit from this, and how can we not make big mistakes, and how does that roll out? For the cloud, it's a hot button, looking to modernize. There's a whole lot of pushes there, various folks trying to move GIS into the mainstream as a core fundamental piece of capabilities, and using cloud as a technology to get in on that discussion and be involved in that. And that's all good. And I see there's a lot of benefits and challenges along those lines. And so this is just looking at some of that sort of stuff as to how do we modernize, how do we get the benefit out of all these technologies for what one's trying to achieve. So I'll look at some of the key motivations, capabilities, practical steps, pros and cons, and sorts of things one would weigh before making a decision on how to add cloud into your GIS solution or what level of adoption. And it's actually becomes it's sort of an organizational decision as well as a technology decision as well as a data decision, and ties in with, well, what does GIS bring to the table and how does GIS benefit from that? So as you'll see in a few of these slides, I've used the cloud to explain what we're doing in the cloud, or at least our thinking along the lines of the cloud. So looking at this, there's major things as to why go for the cloud. What does that offer? This is high level before we talk just about the GIS piece of that puzzle. But in large part, there's accessibility and collaboration. All of a sudden, you can have access to a whole lot of data. You can make your data available and collaborate and work through all of that. So there's in that, I mean, people can now have remote access to information. They can share workspaces, collaborate on workspaces. You can deal with mobile GIS. So there's the remote access, mobile GIS, shared workspaces. So those are all tying along with collaboration. The other one is scalability and flexibility. No doubt about that. You can get huge amounts of processing power and you can add stuff and scale down and scale up very quickly with cloud technologies and capabilities there. You can also look at on-demand resources, turning things on and off as needed. Rapid deployment, you can spin up a machine or spin up an application even fairly quickly. There's a lot of that. Also big data. We've become in a world very familiar with having access to just tons and tons of data. Does that mean everybody needs it for everything? Well, that's part of the discussion, right? Cost effectiveness, that's often motivated as, hey, you know what, if we put everything in the cloud, then it won't cost us as much as having to run it ourselves and have people on-prem and all of that. And that's probably a big ticket item, pun intended, I suppose. But nonetheless, does it change the total cost of ownership? And how does the pay-as-you-go model, how does that deal with it? So you cost effectiveness and looking at pay-as-you-go as well. But there are definitely a bunch of things it brings there. There are other benefits. In some cases, it's enhanced security. Of course, it's now in the cloud, so security, that one you could go either way. Definitely data management, both a challenge and a whole lot of new possibilities. There's also integration with other systems, and they will each raise their own kind of points. So that's sort of in the cloud. And if we put on our GIS hat a little bit, what I'm going to do is run a poll. We will be using this thing called the Mentimeter. It runs the polls. You remain anonymous. You don't need to log in, but if you scan the QR code or you go to mentimeter.com, they will then be able to answer some of the polls. We only have, I think, 4 or 5. So I'm going to go to the next slide right here and start the thing. I've left the code up there in case you missed it, and we'll start that. So this first question is just to get a feel in the room, as it were, is where is your organization with cloud adoption? So what do you think on that? You can answer it when you get in there, ranging from basically nothing to everything and a little bit in between. So we kind of want to get a feel for that. So I'm glad somebody joined in there. Thanks. And we know these things. These decisions within organizations are it's a multifaceted decision-making process there. All right, so look at that. We have a pretty normal curve. And I'll come back to that too. Well, what do you think it's going to be in the future? And we've, involved with a lot of customers and kind of see how the path they're walking and where they're going and obviously working on that. All right, we got a couple more joined in there, so that pulls down the 80%. But 7 folks have put it in, so we're close to having enough to make sense out of that. All right. Well, thank you for that, and then we'll roll on. So that's probably why you're here. It's like, okay, well, let's see what other people are thinking and saying about this cloud thing, and how does that work, and how does it not work, or what's the challenge? So why use cloud for GIS? So let's add that GIS component in there. There's a few things. It's often seen as a broader effort to modernize operations, really to make the data more accessible and actionable. I think for me, what I've seen a lot of is it just brings the data more available to a lot of people and really helps with that and makes it easier for the GIS folks to actually publish and push data around. And so it really solves this problem of, as the complexity of data grows, as you want to have specific data for specific people, it allows you to build that out and potentially allow you to not have to be worrying about the technology rather than actually looking at data and pushing that out. It really bridges that gap because it makes a more flexible, scalable, and efficient data management setup so your practices can be standardized. But as of everything, it's not a simple technology. There's a lot more to it than that. But why use it? A couple more points on that. Often we hear enable digital transformation, and that is entirely true. It absolutely can do that. It can also lead you down a path that's way in excess of what you may or may not need. It really does make it very easy to provide GIS data at the point of use in its context. The deployment flexibility can be a whole lot better. And then provisioning, you can turn stuff on and off as needed, and you can scale if you've got a big thing going on. You can scale that and do performance and have access to processing power that you probably never had before. There's also, it opens up the abilities for adding a whole lot of other capabilities, which make for a great demo, by the way, and I'd be happy to do that at any point. We've been playing with some of that stuff too. Integrations are supposedly flexible, and that is true because what the cloud is essentially doing is it's also standardizing on communication protocol between organizations, between REST points and things like that. So in general, this is sort of that very high level executive map that looks wonderful because now everybody's tied into it. It's funny, but I've had a diagram like this for 20 years. It's just now that the technology is, this is what GIS really does. It's bringing data to various parts of the organization, depending. So that, and I do put the references on the slides there for any pictures that I've pulled from elsewhere. But let's drill into it. So IT and organizational benefits are a big deal. Use other published data. So now through the cloud, you have access to a ton of additional extra data, depending on, if you're a council and it's your data in your region, or if you're nationwide and you're interested in, looking at the weather in relation to other stuff, and you can aggregate that. But that published data is now available. Availability can be controlled and it's easily enabled. And then on the GIS side, what we're often doing is looking at how do you actually share this stuff? How do you control who can see what? How do I create a simple view map, or even a map that I can stick in the web page for a specific task, or a map that, is doing the tree trimming or the road sweeping or the trash pickup or the, water or sewer or zoning or any of those as a custom map, and you want to embed it in with those reports or in with those web pages or project pages or operational groups or anything like that. The other part is then what we call a simple custom app. And how do you create that? In other words, does it have a search button? Can it redline? How do you add that functionality where now it's not just a map, it's actually an app, or call it that as a loose terminology, but it's something more that has controlled access to data. Maybe even people can edit things or add things or stuff like that. So why use the cloud? It makes all of this, it really adds a whole new dimension as to what we can do on that front. Now, a lot of us, there's some gray areas because a lot of us have been using web services. And so, you can publish WMS, WFS, that stuff's been around a while. And so, is that cloud? Well, it certainly can contribute into being cloud. And so, looking at cloud as a complete platform is a little different than just using cloud and web. So there's sort of a bit of a gray area and a transition, and they build on top of each other. But just moving forward on cloud, what we mean is the actual platform itself, not just access to data, and moving that platform to be predominantly in the cloud as opposed to predominantly in your own systems on your own premise. Of course, you could be setting up your own cloud yourself, a private cloud versus a public cloud. So there's sort of a gray area there. I mean, we have customers where we're hosting their entire system in the cloud on a cloud platform, but they're sitting in a desktop connecting to that data on a traditional desktop app. So completely the other way around. If you look then, and what I've done here is just pulled in screenshots and obviously tagged them for where they came from of various companies and products and things like that. Sometimes it looks easy, but I can also pull diagrams where all of these things and the communication levels and the different data and everything can become exceedingly complicated, but it's all in the cloud. So everything's, supposedly easy. And somewhat it does represent, and this is what this quote is from, where I got that, and that is the deployment generally resembles an on-premise deployment from a software standpoint, because you've got, it's web, desktop, or the browser on a desktop, and it's all mobile, and it's dealing with data in databases and connecting to it from various places. But the communication in between those and the platform delivering those, that's a little different. So interesting enough. Here's one where a full-blown GIS in the cloud where you've got it, like a desktop GIS, except that all this data is not on anybody's premise. It's being served in an account, and you can literally go in and add users, take this and push it out onto mobile apps, get that information coming in, or push things into what we call custom apps, where you've got the name of whoever it is, and it's a specific functionality and capabilities for that particular focus and or user. And you can do it pretty quick. So now as the GIS person, hey, we got a whole lot of things we can go play with to deliver the GIS part of what we do with the data that we know about to a whole lot of contexts and interconnect with services, etc., between those. So the possibilities are good. Things like just get an embeddable map viewer. Here's an example of another example where you can go in, and this is a full web-based GIS. You can see active layers and all these things and select stuff and see it, but that's all in the cloud already. And so from there, you can literally call up essentially, in this case, sets up a widget, and the widget creates an app and publishes that to a mobile, for example. Set your language, your logos, what you want in there, determine and go check boxes on each of these categories as to, well, what functionality is in this web app or view map and or mobile, and what forms and what can the people do, and can they do a whole lot of different things. And so from there, that underlying map on the back left, this is a stripped down limited icons, simple styles from there and forms, and that's pushed out just by toggling stuff on and off and saying, okay, go publish, and off you go. It's not actually that new. Here's one. This was actually 8 years ago, but there's QGIS Cloud, and there's a plugin, and you can put it in there and say you're going to set your layers and everything else. Obviously, there's various settings you set up on the background, but then you say publish map, and it's going to then create a web map with a URL, a mobile map, a WMS service, an admin interface, and then obviously you can go get support. But in essence, I can take what I said here, and this obviously can access data from anywhere. This GIS Cloud thing will push it into cloud-based layers, which can then be accessible. So for example, this particular user, and I gave credit down the bottom there, has a set up a WMS, and that WMS, you can pop it in, get the link, etc. But in point of fact, they've also created then a simplified map. So you'll see it's got the layers here, and it's got limited icons and specific symbologies as well as limited data. So this is essentially just an app, but it's coming from cloud-based source, and we've got the builders already built in. So that's actually gone a lot long way further, but I found this one very interesting in that it was actually there. So how do we actually do this? Well, this is a pretty big change. You do need to plan, but where we're sitting, we see that folks need to focus on what are the needs and priorities within your organization. You don't have to do everything all at once. This doesn't have to be the big switchover, unless, of course, the decision making isn't entirely driven by needs and priorities. Look at use cases like, does the crew that's doing that, will this benefit them? Or as we're doing a planning exercise, is this going to help? Will this actually save on staff? Will it make the data better and more accessible? You're obviously going to have to choose some form of a platform. I'd suggest you actually try it before you buy it. Take a look, go and check it out. If they say it's that easy to spin something up, then maybe you should try it. The partners and your supports and your providers are actually become quite important, because you're acting now as go-between with a technology input, an organizational philosophy and approach that involves a whole lot of things around data and who can see what and do what and who controls it, and IT stuff, and then also the capabilities and the staffing that you have. So there's a lot there to kind of plan out how you do that. So I did want to put a little poll in there as we get into pros and cons, just to kind of ask you, well, more or less, what are the main benefits you've seen with using the cloud for GIS? So I assumed some of you would be on the cloud, and that came up in the early poll. So if you want to do the QR code, go and type in something there. It's just an open-ended benefit there that you might have seen. Remote access, yeah, that's a good one, right? Wider range of customers, yep, bringing data to different folks, and also, yeah, well, maybe I'll hold back so that I don't put words in people's mouth. Okay, so that's a few. Collaboration, yeah, it's a lot easier to share stuff, see stuff, control who sees it, what's going on there, access from anywhere. And that's partly an internet thing too, right? If you were on a browser, you could access from anywhere too. Use of widgets, additional functionality. Yeah, absolutely. So digital, hard as opposed to hard copies or static maps where you do an update once a year, once a month, once a day, or whatever. Yeah, good.
So we have spoken about, and Colin have spoken about all the pros sort of already. So this is a more of a summary, but when we get into the cons, it might become a little bit more interesting. So the obvious ones are cost efficiency. You may be reducing your internal IT infrastructure. You don't have to upgrade it every now and then. Your servers, your storage, all of those things. Maybe you can have lower maintenance on all of that. The cloud one is all backed up professionally, so you don't have to worry about that in terms of your own cost. Accessibility we've mentioned, browser based, app based on all sorts of different devices. Scalability, if you suddenly need 3 or 10 editors because you have a big data capture project, you can just buy the extra licenses mostly, just make it available to those teams to do outside work and just scale back again if you need to. Collaboration, you guys mentioned that in the Menti as well. There's this one big data storage in the cloud, and all the tools offer nowadays real-time collaboration communication on all of those sort of things. It's flexible for managers to manage and for administrators to manage. Often there's a pay-as-you-go sort of thing. And it also reduces, obviously, the data duplication. It makes the data like a single source of truth there up in the cloud, and hopefully those silos are then reduced, where people are sitting on their own data on their own computer or something like that. So everything is all open and available. Yeah, so that's sort of a summary. Everybody knew all of these things,
They already
but
mentioned some of them.
yeah, yeah. So let's move on then.
So moving on to the cons, I could do the same thing. If you want to fill in there quickly, what issues? So now we're on to the cons. What issues have you seen or experienced with using the cloud for GIS? Not just cloud for anything. The irony of it is this whole Menti thing is a cloud-based thing as well. So but yeah, if you can fill that out, or if you put in just a comment, it's just free form comments. What issues have you seen or experienced? And then we'll run through our list and discussion. Okay, on the cost here. So the vision of cloud is an easy thing to sell. The reality is you have to look into that, which is kind of what we're doing now. Still having an on-premise backup system. Not entirely sure or unable to access due to internet issues or permissions. Yeah. Okay. All right. Anyone else? Yeah. Integrations as a challenge. Okay. That's another one there. Risk and cost. Yeah. Organizational philosophy. You know, data can't go out of our premise or it's too risky or whatever the reasons that comes into it. So it makes it more of a difficult decision within an organization because you may have leadership that can go either way. Okay, who do you use? How do you choose a partner? What's the difference? Is it better, cheaper? Is it actually going to work? All of those things. Yep, that's good. Excellent. Yeah. So those are all things, and I think you probably hit on most of the ones that have come up in Philip's next slide. Security concerns. Yep, there you go. That one's for sure.
So this is sort of balance things off a little bit from all the all the marketing that we get, and everybody thinks cloud is all great, and management often thinks it's all great. Let's go for it. They believe all of the marketing, but this is where it becomes a little bit sort of down to earth, where we can a real world problem. So if you look at the first one, and someone's mentioned it in the Menti, the integrations becomes a little bit more difficult because often you have two systems that develop much totally different. One might be still on premise, one might be in the cloud, and integrating these is not an easy thing. URL integrations obviously normally are pretty easy between these things, but point-to-point integrations is not that easy to do. Someone mentioned loss of control, which is infrastructure. You're not in control of the infrastructure. Someone else is. You're just a user. Your security becomes an issue because you're also not in control of that. You are basically handing that over, and often customers and users of cloud infrastructure try or asks that the data centers for these cloud providers are within the boundaries of the country they're in for a level of security. Sometimes these companies just doesn't have that. Your losing feature is desktop applications. So over years and decades, people have added functionality to all of the desktop classic client server apps, and often when you come into edge case scenarios, those were already handled by the desktop apps, whereas the cloud ones is more of a one fits all sort of thing. And if it's not there, to get a functionality in is not always that easy. Something that relates to security, a simple account hijack can become an issue. So meaning someone maybe write his password down on a piece of paper lying around somewhere, and that's all they need to get into the system. There's nothing to be able to stop that. So that is a high risk. Often more rigid and less customizable solutions. Sort of mentioned that with the desktop apps item above, but yeah, the one size fits all idea. Then the internet dependency, that is also someone mentioned that in the Menti. So you are 100% dependent on your internet connection, speed, latency, downtimes, all of that to access your own data, basically. So that is, we're living in a world where internet access is definitely much more stable and quicker and all of that, but it's still something to think about. Vendor lock-in could be something. Once these systems become so complicated and dependent, it's very difficult to move between the one provider towards the other one because they might have all sorts of different APIs and things and underlying services you use in the one and it's just not offered in another one or something like that. So you might want to think about that one. When you do move across from on-prem to a cloud solution, you might have to do a whole lot of things to fit in with that cloud, changing data structures, platforms, all of those things. So in terms of a project to go from one to the other, it doesn't replace good project management principles, good planning, good execution, structured approach to the whole thing. It's not just here we go, one day we're not on the cloud, next day we are. So that whole project principles still apply. And then I think probably the big one for everyone to realize is to manage expectations from everywhere, from users, from management, from your own teams, and all of that is, make sure that everybody doesn't think cloud is the thing that solves all problems. You have to manage that expectation to be real and also that the level of effort is often bigger or larger than maybe a simple upgrade on your on-premises. So these things are there to keep us real and not to just jump on a bandwagon because it's the buzzword. Thanks, Colin.
Thanks, Philip. There's a few things too that you've checked in there, and as I've gone around and looked, so this is a long bit of text, and I've put the thing there. But in essence, the costs in the long run, and that was one that's interesting to me because essentially you're now renting the car, or you're getting meals brought in all the time in terms of services, and we know that the cost of that in its beginning stages can be much more expensive than actually owning the car or cooking for yourself. And I couldn't really think of better analogies, but it's kind of interesting. Now it's not quite apples to apples here in terms of those analogies because you're getting much better and much bigger functionality, and you're not having to maintain the in-house chef or the IT person, so that it changes a little bit. But in essence, the costs in the long run can be a big one. Level of control, you nailed it. The dedicated infrastructure, you've got full control over everything, but you're also responsible for everything. The interesting part is even though you move to the cloud, if that's your role, you're probably still responsible even so, because you're responsible for the decision and you're relying now on this other third party. Security and compliance, we talked about. Consistency and performance, that can be a thing. The vendor lock-in, and then also data. So these are aspects that were raised. Yeah, I thought this was a pretty good summary of them, and it touches in on a lot of those things. And I have one more to go through. I did spend a little bit of effort and have looked at it as we cost these things out. This one here is interesting. They've raised a few items. The one is, be aware of the costs. It's not just simply what you get Azure or AWS. There's a ton of other things. There's even costs for getting out of the system, for getting your data back out. It was interesting. One of the places I saw that in the EU, they actually have a legislation that all cloud offering people have to include the ability for somebody to exit the system and get their data. There's redundancy, scalability. Any specialized services or anything can cost more. There's a lot of add-ons. It's upsell. So if you're looking at, we're going to add AI and you do X number of questions or whatever, it's going to crank your cost up. Things like that. It varies depending where you are. It's a subscription-based licensing. You got to look at that because now you're spreading these maps and apps or whatever it is and integrations to multiple more people. So you just need to budget for that and realize that that's going to happen. Skill gaps, just because you give an easier to use app doesn't mean that it's all there. There's also the IT skills because they're still managing and assigning and all of those things and tracking it to actually go in and deal with that sort of stuff. There's also cloud-based apps that track usage and costs and everything, so you can look at a certain spend and go and deal with that. So let's jump right in. I'll do the last one here. Has the cloud saved your organization money? And yeah, this costs one. That's probably where I've seen the most dissension, and that's why I came up with those analogies. It's like, oh, hang on a minute. If we ate out all the time or got food, delivered all the time, or we even got our groceries purchased all the time, it's essentially going to cost you more. But you may get better stuff, and you may have a whole lot more variety and all sorts of things like that. So it's sort of interesting as we've run through this and looked at, well, what exactly are our customers looking for, and what do we deliver and how do we work with that. So that's a part of where this comes from. And by the way, in this presentation, I've specifically not tried to just push you on a product. It's more of a discussion around, well, hey, this is a change in our industry. What's going on? How do we talk about that? So just so you know, and if you are interested in that, we can take that up on a later presentation, obviously. Okay, looks like that's a maybe and a no. Nobody has volunteered that they've saved money on it, so that's interesting. But it's also not quite apples to apples, because sometimes you get a whole lot more functionality and capabilities for delivering solutions. So there's that.
I thought this is a term that is often used
Okay.
in the industry as well, hybrid solutions. And basically what that is, it makes a distinction between public and private cloud, and then obviously the on-premise part of it. So public cloud is what we used to, where you just go to a website, sign up. It's sort of a shared environment where different customers and users uses the same infrastructure. Whereas a private cloud is different from that. It is locked down for one user, the infrastructure and the ownership and all of that. So that is an option as well, private cloud. So it's sort of the best of both worlds, but that can run pretty expensive due to, you basically have a single vendor for the infrastructure and the service. So that's the hybrid thing. The most common hybrid one is public cloud plus on-premise solutions as a mix. And if you can get that to talk together well and integrate and be cost efficient, that's probably a good solution for smaller or medium sized businesses and councils and water corporations and so on. I've mentioned URL integrations is probably likely a good one between cloud systems. And just again, the clear understanding of these things, what they are and what's best for you and how to get there is of utmost importance to make it work for you and to have that cost saving that cloud promises, but sometimes struggles to deliver.
Yeah, and we've seen that a lot where there's certain integrations, particularly, and certain departments that'll have, whether it's billing or whether it's work orders or whatever it is, and moving, that to the cloud requires a whole lot of stuff that they may not be ready for. So then you're doing on-prem and cloud, which literally means you're now trying to deal with getting the one to talk to the other and dealing with now both solutions. So you've got to manage sort of more than one thing. So those are all decisions you've got to make. And I'm not particularly saying one is better than the other. I think it really, largely it depends on the organization, the capabilities within the organization, and the goals. If you've got a very targeted, hey, we want to do this and the cloud is better for the doing this with that, and yes, we can achieve it in this way, then that's a little different. Whereas a blanket, hey, we're just moving everything to the cloud, well, that you might want to think about. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents. The last one of these, I kind of was really interested in looking at where do you think the adoption of the cloud will be maybe 5 years from now? And you can just pick one of those. There'll be nothing will change, or we'll all be in the cloud and we're done. So this will sort of compare where we were at the first slide compared to where we might be later on in, say, 5 years from now. Yeah, some things take a little while to change. I mean, it's exciting. I think it's exciting. We've got a lot that we can do, a lot that can be achieved, but there's a bunch of hurdles. So, all right, this has moved that needle a little closer to all in cloud, and we'll go back from there. Thank you. Appreciate the feedback. So I kind of want to have a discussion. We can open the mics. So we have at least 5 minutes just to talk about a little bit, if those that want to. I don't know if this was useful, and probably a lot of this you already knew. It's sort of, this is as I said, I'm trying not to push product per se and just talk about, industry, that we're all involved in this, and it's actually a fairly small pool. So there's any kind of thing, there's systems more suited, etc. We can put open the mics to anybody. And then also we are, in a couple of months, we're looking at utility network models. Obviously, it's something that OpenSpatial has been doing for years. It's also a fairly hot button within the industry. So what we do with our webinars, by the way, while you're thinking about your questions, is we sort of trying to do a little more industry stuff on every other month or a few months down the track, and product stuff in between, so that it's good for our existing customers, but also just good to look around, on that. And actually the discussions, I find those valuable because you folks also have, you're living it as well. So back to those. Anybody have any questions at this point?
Hi, Colin. It's Mitch Liddell here from Tweedshire in Australia. I've got a question for you. Just where is OpenSpatial with their cloud stuff? Do they have any partners from our perspective, like with AutoCAD, are you looking at AutoCAD Docs? Are you looking at Azure? Where are you guys at with your progression in that area, I guess?
Yeah, so it is a major focus for us, along obviously. So, as having standard products, we keep those going, but cloud is a big priority. And we're running through these models, and essentially the stuff you're looking at here is the sorts of things we've been looking at as to, well, where do we grow our solution set? What do we need to offer? How do we roll that out? So it is a big focus for us. Hopefully we'll have a webinar on that sometime soon. And when you talk about cloud, essentially we already have hosted customers that are in the cloud. We have our own Oracle Cloud instance that's an open spatial cloud, and we have customers where their Oracle is run as a node within the cloud, and they access it both on-prem and through web-based tools. So we have a fair amount of that already going on just with what we have. But it's not quite cloud in terms of, hey, I can just spin up an app and click a few buttons and publish a map and embed it and all of those things, and then all along that. So those are things we've been looking at, and how do we build that out? And that's exciting stuff. It's a priority. And as of now, I'm not going to give you a when and how, but we're doing that stuff for sure. And we have, already had customers where we've delivered the entire solution in the cloud, and they've hosted that and run that as the service provider through our own cloud instance accounts as well for a number of years already in Australia and in North America. So I know it's probably not the answer you were looking for, but my job, CEO here, is to guide what's our vision, where's our future, and cloud is absolutely a priority. Yeah, we're taking those on a one-on-one basis at this point. It's too early to kind of announce too much, but we have put our programmers on this for a while already. We've tested out a few different things. We've kind of narrowed the gap on that, and we're very close to looking at rolling that out. But it takes time. We could just, pull the trigger now, but I want it to be a more productized thing, and so there's various things on our side. But as you can see, I mean, this is the sort of stuff we've been talking about, and it's guided by customers' inputs. What are the needs? So there's all of that, and also what's the cost? And so if you can identify the use cases and you can look at what those needs are, the capabilities. So fundamental capabilities we pretty much already have. Now it's a matter of, well, what's that rollout? So happy to walk along with you on that. Good question.
Thank you very much.
I guaranteed Philip somebody is going to ask that question. Anyway, so there's a little note in the chat saying, hey, you can register for the next webinar. So, I'd be happy to take it offline. There's a lot of aspects we kind of zipped right over, and I'll try to take the high ground on a number of those things and look at, well, hey, these are the options. So, you folks are living that. You're obviously probably involved in a lot of those, but hopefully there was a couple of useful things in there as well. Okay, thank you very much. Have a great day, and thanks for your time.